For this is the app without lazy loading, so the app as we currently have it. And if you go to the network tab and you reload the app here on this off page, unauthenticated, you see we download a bunch of files here. We have our, let me shrink this. We have our polyfills files, styles.js, vendor.js, main.js. These are 4 JavaScript files. And we're in development mode here, which is why they are extremely big. They will be smaller once we build the app for production, because this code is not optimized at all. It contains many debug features, so it will be way smaller later, and we'll see that later. But at the moment, you see we have pretty big files here. 4 megabytes, 100 kilobytes, almost a megabyte, 236 kilobytes. Now again, this will shrink significantly, but still, this is our current file size. With lazy loading, we should be able to decrease that. How do we add lazy loading though? Let's start with the recipes module. Because, for example here, when we're not authenticated, we certainly don't need to load the recipes module code because we can't even access anything from the recipes module here. It might also not make sense to load the shopping list module, even though we can access it, because unless we do, there is no need to download that code. So let's start with the recipes module nonetheless. There we have the recipes module, and we have its own routes here in the recipes routing module. Now, having the routes registered here is an important starting point. For lazy loading to work, your feature module needs to bring its own routes, as we're doing it here. It needs to bring its own route config. We're doing that here, and it needs to bring that with for child, which is also what we're doing here. Now, one thing we'll need to change though, that path, recipes here, I will change it to an empty path because now we need to add something to our app routing module for lazy loading to work. Here, I'll again add another route, and that will be the route for recipes, so the path I just removed from the recipes module. Now here, I'm in the app routing module, important. I add that path again here, but now I don't add a component which I want to load, but instead you add load children. That's a special property in a route config, which Angular understands as please only load the code content or the module I'm going to point you at when the user visits this path here. Now let me show you what this means. We can now add a string here, not a type, not a component type you pointed, but a string, which is a path to the module you want to load when this page here or when this path here is visited. And I, of course, want to load relatively from the app routing module my recipes folder, and there the recipes module, not the recipes routing module, but the recipes module. And now you also need to add something here. It's not just a path, but you also need to add the name of that module, because Angular can't know that, and it needs to know the class name, because technically it will go to that path and then try to dynamically import a specific object from that file. And theoretically, that could be named anything. We are, of course, following that naming convention of naming this recipes module in this casing here, when the file name is named recipes.module. But no one is forcing us to follow that naming pattern. And therefore, we explicitly have to tell Angular what the name of the exported class in that file is. And you add that by adding a hashtag and then that name. So load children points at /recipes/recipes.module.ts and then hashtag and the name of that class. The effect of that will be that now the code is split at that point, and everything at this path here, so this entire module and everything that module uses, so all the declarations of that module, will be put into a separate code bundle, which is then downloaded and parsed on demand as soon as a user visits this page, but not sooner. And that is simply achieved by the Angular CLI essentially analyzing this when we build our app, and it will then analyze the recipes module at which we point here, and it will look at what we declare in here and so on, and will put the code of all these things we declare here into that separate bundle, which is now built separately, detached from our main bundle with which the app starts. Important for this to have a real effect and save code is that you have these import statements only in the recipes module, and you don't have any old import statements to, let's say, the recipes component in, let's say, the app module. Because ultimately, for the build process, it's important what you import here at the top. What you import here, like that forms module, which I should remove in the app module, what you import here is all bundled together into one code bundle. So in the recipes module, in the end, the build process will look at these imports, which are required for this to work, but it will look at these imports, and whatever is included here will be included in the same bundle. So if you have another, even unused import, add something like this lying around in your app module, then this part would be included into the app module code bundle, even though you're not using it there. So to have the biggest effect and save the most code, make sure your imports here at the top are correct. If they are, then you'll get the biggest possible effect from that code splitting. Now, in the recipes routing module, it's important that you have an empty path, because you have to keep in mind that we now changed the route config to include the path here in the app routing module, and it will load the recipes module whenever we visit /recipes, and therefore in the recipes module, we now already are at /recipes, and hence here in the recipes routing module, which is only kicking in once we do visit this module, we should start with /nothing, because again, we already are at /recipes. Now save all that and quit your build process and restart ngserve, because after adding lazy loading, you will need to restart that to ensure that it really has an effect and is taken into account. Now here I'm getting an error, and the issue is that here we should remove the .ts. Now, one note about this syntax: in newer versions of Angular, you have an alternative syntax, and this syntax might even fail in newer projects. So if you are getting an error like module cannot be found when trying this out, which we'll do in a second, or if you want to switch to that more modern different syntax for any other reason, here is that other syntax you could use. Instead of having this string here to identify the module which should be loaded, you can add a function here, an anonymous arrow function, and in the function body you call import, like a function. So you don't use import as we do it up there to import modules, but you call it dynamically as a function. To import, you then pass the path to the module, so /recipes module. And now you don't add a hashtag thereafter to identify the module, but instead import resolves a promise. So now you call then there, and in this promise or in this then block, you pass in a function which receives in the end the module which was loaded here, hence I named the argument m. And on this module object, you can extract your modules, the recipes module in this case. So this here is in the end an alternative syntax you could use for loading routes lazily. Instead of using the string you see in the videos thereafter, you can use this function. Now, generally, it doesn't matter which of the two approaches you use, but this is the more modern one. And if you are getting errors with the approach I'm showing in the lectures, which is the string-based one, switch to this one instead. Let's restart ngserve thereafter. And this looks good. However, now when this reloads, you should get an error like this. And do you have an idea what might be causing that? Well, in the app module, I'm still importing the recipes module. Now, the recipes module is the module we're now trying to load lazily. So we should only have this part here, this route where we use load children. We must not import recipes module anymore. Otherwise, we're importing it both eagerly and lazily at the same time, and that will cause an error. Of course, also remove that import statement. Otherwise, it will technically work, but you won't save anything in code size. Now, with that saved, you should be able to save this again and recompile. And now this looks good, no error. And now let's go to the network tab here and reload this page. Now, the vendor.js file is still pretty big because that's just Angular. but main.js actually shrank. Previously that was, I think, 117 kilobyte, so definitely above 100. Now it's 75, so this shrank. And we can see where it went if we clean that here and we do log in with valid credentials. And now we are redirected to recipes, and indeed here you now see that you have this recipes module.js file here. The naming might differ, but that has the 41 kilobytes by which our bundle effectively shrank roundabout. And that is that lazy loaded code snippet, that lazy loaded module. And we can interact with that just as we could before. So that is all working, but now we're lazy loading. And this shrinks our initial bundle size. Now, of course, the big bundle, the 4.1 megabyte bundle, did not shrink, but again, this will be optimized later. And the bigger your app grows, the bigger the features are you're lazy loading, the bigger the effect will be, of course. If you have a large app with an entire area in that app that the user might never visit, if you lazy load that, it might have a huge impact because you can save so much in that initial bundle. Now, of course, it makes most sense to lazy load parts of the app where there is at least a slight chance of the user never using it. For example, in this application, you could argue that lazy loading the off page doesn't make too much sense because the user will always see that. Though I guess that's also only correct if you assume that the user is already logged in. If the user is not logged in, we can visit the recipes page and therefore will never see the off page. And therefore even lazy loading the off page might make sense. But if you have some page which will always be visited or with a very, 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 very high chance, then lazy loading that page or that module might not be worth it because you have to consider that lazy loading of course comes with the downside of that extra code bundle being downloaded later. And therefore, once it's needed, there might be a slight delay in your app since that code needs to be downloaded and parsed. So you're basically just postponing that. Though I'll also show an optimization technique with that in a second.